Hello, OpenBoxes users. This is a tutorial on how to use the consumption report in OpenBoxes. The consumption report is designed to tell you exactly how much of a certain item you have consumed monthly and by location. So in order to access the consumption report, you first log into the location, the depot out of which you're looking for consumption. So here I am in Distribution Center. I am going to go to Reporting, and under Transaction Reports, I'm going to choose the Consumption Report. Now this brings up a page on which I have to set several parameters, and then I have the option to set several filters. So the first parameters that I'm setting are the origin and the dates. So my origin is automatically set as the location that I'm in because I'm looking at consumption out of this depot. If I want to look at multiple origin locations, I can add something here. I could say I want to look at consumption out of 2 or 3 depots within the same network, for example. That's totally possible. You can add them. And it should filter out any transactions between the 2 depots as consumption. However, it's just important if you're going to do 2 depots as origins that you check the results, because obviously things can get very complex and you may get results that you weren't expecting from using 2 separate origins. So I usually recommend, until you're really familiar with the report and you know exactly what the data looks like, you just work from 1 report. So the next thing you must set, and the report won't run if you don't set it, is the dates that you're looking at. So you have to choose consumed on or after, so the initial date that you're looking at. And then you also have to choose, so let's say it was August 1, and you also have to choose the final date that you're looking at. So let's say today. This will give you the amount of a certain product consumed between these dates, and the average consumption that is spit out will be based on these dates. So it sounds self-explanatory, but a lot of people do get confused when they first see the numbers. If you run this from June to September, you're going to see a different average monthly consumption than from August to September. The reason being, consumption varies a little bit by every month. So depending on the time period you're using, you're going to see a different total consumption and then a different average consumption, because maybe you consumed a lot more in June than you did in August. So just be prepared that these numbers may not exactly match other reports that you've run or other numbers in the system if you're not using the same date parameters when you're setting those. The next thing you need to do is choose your filters. So you can just completely ignore this section and just run the report. It's not required. However, let's talk through a few of your options. You can add a filter to see only a certain category. This can be really helpful if you're only interested in a particular category and you have a really long product list. Maybe you don't want to wait for it to load forever. That's another reason to maybe choose a shorter time period here so that you have a smaller data set. Another thing you can do is filter by tags. So if you have a particular list that is demarcated by tags, then let's say I wanted to look at just neonatology, for example, I could do that. And then the final thing is destinations. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the destinations filter. For now, I would say leave it blank. And if you leave it blank, it will show you not only all of the destinations available to you, but then you can filter after you've run the report, but before you download the final product. So the only time I would put a filter in the destinations here initially is if you have a very specific location you want to look at. So let's say you only want to see things from this distribution center to one hospital in your network, and you only want to look at data for that hospital. In that case, I would select in here, and I would choose, you can start to write, and you can choose an option for a location that you want to limit to. But for now, we're just going to leave that blank and see all locations. Finally, transaction types. So this is an important one to note, and I want to talk a little bit more about it. So the transaction types will automatically be set as transfer out. What does that mean? That means that you're only seeing, as part of your consumption, transactions where you actually transferred the stock out of your warehouse. So anything that was in an outbound stock movement, for example, is a transfer out. Anything where you actually used the stock transfer button on the inventory page, that's a transfer out. So most of the time when you're thinking about consumption, that's what you're thinking about. There are a few other options. So one is if you want to see, the two most important ones are if you want to see expired or damaged, then this will also show you expired or damaged product. Now, I just want to warn you that I would not recommend using this report for expired or damaged product. The reason being, if you look at the columns here, you'll see a column for issued, that's your transfer out, and that will tell you the total amount that was transferred out. You have a column for expired, that's your expired, it will tell you the total amount that was expired. Damaged, same thing. And then there's this total column. And the monthly, weekly, and daily averages are based on your total. And if you choose expired and damaged here, though that expired and damaged quantity will be included in your total, which is part of your monthly average calculation. So if you're looking for, if what you specifically want to use is your monthly consumption, then I would not include expired or damaged on this report. You want to leave those out and leave those as 0, because otherwise, if you have 0 issued but 200 expired, you're going to see a monthly consumption that's taking into account those 200 expired. So if you do want to see how much stock was expired, I would highly recommend using the transaction report. That's right here. And there is another video that will walk you through the transaction report. That is what I would recommend for expiry. So for consumption, I would recommend that you just use the transfer out, and that you, in that case, expired and damaged will be 0 because you haven't included those transaction types in your reporting. Finally, there are some additional render options. These are for the CSV only. So a CSV is an Excel file when you download this in Excel. There are a couple of things you can do. One, you can add additional columns. So there are a lot of different columns here. You can show whether or not a product is cold chain, whether or not it's active, if it's a controlled substance. But the big one people usually want is the cost per unit. So a lot of times people want to see the cost of what has come out of their depot. What you can do here is just add the cost per unit to your additional columns, and that will put the unit cost, so then you can then multiply out the unit cost with your against your consumption numbers. So finally, the choice of format, HTML or CSV, I always recommend running it in HTML first, that means it will appear here on your screen. It's not as detailed a report, but I think it's useful because often it will show you what the data looks like, and then you can make changes to the filters before you actually download it. So I think it's very useful to run in CSV first. The other options down here include quantity on hand, include location breakdown, and include monthly breakdown. So include quantity on hand. This is for both on the page and in the Excel. Include quantity on hand is just saying, like, if you uncheck that, it makes the report faster. So getting the quantity on hand data takes a little longer. If you have really bad internet and you don't actually need your quantity on hand, you can uncheck that, and then the quantity on hand will say 0 because it hasn't gotten that data, but it will get all the other data and the report will just work a little faster. So if you have really bad internet, that's an option for you. The other thing is include location breakdown in CSV and include monthly breakdown in CSV. So these are things to include in the Excel file. And once we download the Excel file, I'll show you exactly what they do. But for now, we're going to leave them all three checked. So finally, I am going to run my report. This is one of the reports that takes a longer time to run, so that's why there are some options like leaving out quantity on hand in order, or filtering by location or filtering by category in order to not have to wait quite as long for the data to run. Great, so now we've loaded our data and we can just see what it looks like in HTML. We can see the total number that was issued during this time period, so August 1 to September 30. We can see expired, damaged, and other, which are going to be 0 because we didn't choose those transaction types, right? So we're always going to see 0 there unless we actually choose to include expired and damaged in the filters. Then we're going to see our total, which is going to be the same as our issued because we didn't include these other elements. And then finally, monthly, weekly, daily. These calculations are very basic calculations. So what it does is it takes the number of days in this time period. It divides the total number that was issued by the number of days. And then to get monthly, it multiplies by 30. To get weekly, it multiplies by 10. Daily is, of course, the original number. So this daily number is this number divided by the number of days in this time period. And then the weekly is this number multiplied by 7. The monthly is this number multiplied by 30. Now, the next thing you have is the quantity on hand. This is your current quantity on hand for this product. And then your months, which is your months of stock. This is your quantity on hand divided by your monthly consumption. So, of course, if you're using products that have expiry, this does not take into account expiry. So you might have 12 months of stock on hand, but it all expires tomorrow. So just to keep that in mind, if you are dealing with products that expire, this isn't the be-all and end-all because it doesn't take into account whether those products are going to expire. But what it does give you is a handy indication of approximately how many months you have on hand of a given product based on your consumption rate. So this is a really useful just view to make sure everything looks nice. And you can search this as well by product. So if you're just looking for something quick, you're looking for a couple of different products, this is a good way to go. But most people, they don't want to actually just look at this. They want to do an analysis. They want to take this data and do something with it. And so that's why we also download the CSV, which has more detailed information and also allows us to manipulate it. One thing to note before we download the CSV is at this point, if we want to apply filters, we still can. So once you've seen the data, if you decide that actually you want to filter by destinations, now handily there is an entire list of destinations that this location has issued to during this time period. So this is a list of every location that has been issued to during this time period. So what I can do now is I can actually look at these destinations and I can see, is there any one that I don't actually want to count in my consumption? So maybe I'm looking at this donation partner and I'm thinking, okay, well, that's not really consumption. It's probably stuff that we bought for someone else or we were trying to get rid of. It doesn't really count as part of it's not our network. So I don't want to count that as part of my consumption. So all I have to do is just X that out. And I can X out anything else that I'm worried about that I think is not part of our network or isn't exactly what I'm looking for in this case. So that's why I said don't filter the destinations up front, because if you filter them after you've run the report, then you get a full list of all the locations and you can review them and decide which ones you want, which is often a lot faster than including every location that you want versus just excluding the ones that you don't want. So now that I've done that, I do have to run the report again, just so that the data will refresh. But when I do that, I'm going to run it as an Excel file, as a CSV. So I'm going to again choose my additional column, my cost per unit, and I'm going to change my format from HTML, which is this online version, to CSV, which is the Excel version. It stands for comma separated values. And I'm going to press run report. And now this is going to download for me an Excel file that has all of the information that we've seen on the website, but also several other pieces of information. Great. So we now have that file downloaded. I'm just going to open it up and show you what it looks like. So this file has a lot going on. The first thing it has is your product code, your product name, the category that you've assigned it, any formularies or catalogs that you've put it in, and then also any tags that you've assigned to it so that you can filter by those, and the UOM that you have put on the product. Now your first columns are exactly the ones that you just saw online. Your quantity issued, that's your total quantity transferred out in that time period. Your quantity expired, like we said, we didn't check that, right? So we're not going to get that data. It's just going to be blank. It's going to be 0. Same with quantity damaged and quantity other. So then your consumed monthly is this quantity issued divided by the number of days times 30, like we talked about. And then you can see your quantity on hand and your months of stock remaining. The next field here is your cost per unit, your unit price. So if, for example, you wanted to calculate the total value of what you consumed, you could multiply your quantity issued by this. If you wanted to calculate the total value of your average consumption by month, you could multiply by the unit price. So that's just there as a reference that you can then, do analysis with. And finally, remember we had some options that we could check when we ran this report. We had include location breakdown and include monthly breakdown. So if I didn't check either of those things, the report would stop here at column N. But I did check both of those things. And so what do those things do? Well, the monthly breakdown gives you an outline of exactly what you consumed of that product by month, which is different than your average monthly consumption, right? It's not just this divided by your number of days times 30. It's saying this is what you consumed in August, and this is what you consumed in September. So you can see how each month is contributing to that average. And however many months are in your time period, there will be a column for every month. And the sum of all of the months will always equal your total quantity issued. The same thing is true of the breakdown by location. If you check the breakdown by location, you'll see that a column has been added for every single location that you issue to after the rest of the columns. So if you issue to a lot of locations, be prepared. You could have, if you have 100 different sites that you're serving, you will have 100 different columns here. And what this does, exactly like the monthly breakdown, is it says, okay, of my 881,000 that I issued, how many went to Biotrib? 0. How many went to Buchankari? 0. 4,000 went to Baptiste, 3,000 went to Medishare, etc. on through every column for each location that you issued to. Once again, all of these location columns will add up to your sum total that was in the report. So this way, if you decided after the fact that you wanted to exclude items sent to a certain location from your consumption, perhaps because you aren't sure about the data or it's not something that's within your network. You could resum this data without that location, and that could be your new consumption. So this just gives you a little bit of more information to really do a deep dive into what exactly is driving those consumption numbers. So that is a walkthrough of the consumption report, both in Excel and online. Now, it's important to note that consumption is not the same thing as demand, and OpenBoxes calculates both consumption and demand. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more about how to see demand as distinct from consumption and how to do demand reporting, there are other videos and other instructions that you can check out for the request details report and for the stock card demand tab. So I recommend looking into those and also checking out the transaction report, which will be a great way to see your expired and your damaged products. Thank you for listening.